a couple of different mechanics, or not mechanics, but kind of interactions I wanted to play with here. One was the idea of a challenging trigger zone to get to that then makes the journey away from it easy. So right at the start, that water trigger zone is kind of hard to get to. You have to jump across lots of stepping stones, with the hazard and danger obviously being water, but then you get the water ability and then you just cruise through the water, and it's a nice moment where you feel empowered. So that's the first thing. The second thing I really wanted to play with was the idea of jumping into a trigger zone in midair and then using that ability, falling into a trigger zone and then using that ability while you were in the trigger zone, which I also do later on. So those two kind of little moments of interaction that I kind of wanted the player to experience. The first one is purely an experiential thing. The second thing is more of kind of a puzzle to just work out. That's how you're meant to interact with it. And both of them are obviously used quite a bit later on. So with this level, this was one that kind of grew out of the work I was doing on the other levels kind of around it. It's an example of a level that kind of the mechanics are there mainly because I just liked the way they interacted with each other. So there's a lot of really interesting overlapping kind of movements that you're doing in this environment, going back on yourself, using, changing ability mid-air, water not being a threat, because all the water in this level is obviously surrounded in that blue trigger zone. It means that water becomes a buoyant interaction. You actually have to use the buoyancy, I believe, for the first time in the game in order to hit the switch on the right. So there's a really kind of interesting interaction that takes place here that I wanted to play with, and I think kind of is quite fun. So Team Jump, I love Team Jump. Team Jump, the main purpose of Team Jump was to bring a little bit more humour into the game. I really wanted to have a group of characters who were a bit silly, a bit stupid, to be honest, and a bit fun. The other interesting thing with Team Jump is Team Jump were actually how this game originally was envisaged. When I first started thinking about these mechanics many years ago, I imagined kind of a group of characters all the same that you could basically kind of stack up and make kind of, I don't know the word for it, but those kind of gymnast poses where you stack up a bunch of people on at the same time. I wanted to do that kind of thing with characters in the game. And it kind of, in the context of the game I was thinking about, it didn't really work, but in this context it felt like actually adding a bunch of characters who were all essentially identical, and then getting the player to build them into towers or get them to help each other out became really interesting and became something that was a different style of gameplay. The other characters, because they're all so unique, you kind of think of them as unique entities and use them as such, whereas with these, because they're all the same, I kind of hoped that they would be seen as one unit, and it became a case of almost having a transforming shape character in the game, and I'm a massive Transformers geek, so so that was fun. But yeah, I'm kind of, I feel there's more puzzles to be done with Team Jump. I might have to revisit them one day.
They thought as one, they acted as one.
This is another one of my favourite levels, actually. There's a few things going on here that I just think are really cool. The main one, obviously, is there's current to the water. I programmed this into water the moment I made water. It was very easy. It was actually easier to make the water have a current to it and actually kind of pull the player across than it was to make the water buoyant. So they always had a movement to them, but I never really worked out a puzzle that kind of suited it. It always felt frustrating, or if you played with it, it felt like it was kind of helping you win by default. And this was a fun level to make because I got to use that current in an interesting way. So there's points where that current can be dangerous because it can knock you into things that hurt you. But the bit that I really love in this level, and it's something that I had to tweak things a little bit for, was there are moments where in order to win you have to intentionally sink into the water. But because the water has a currency of it, has a current going through it, you're then swept into a trigger zone which saves you, kind of an underwater save, which is something that doesn't exist in the rest of the game. I really worried that players wouldn't get it and they would kind of avoid it because they'd see it as dangerous. But by doing that, it just breaks the mechanics in a really charming way that you kind of have to sacrifice your characters in order to, by default, be saved by that secondary trigger zone. And I'm just really chuffed with it. It came together. It felt really good. It was hard. I had to fiddle with some code to make it work, but it's a really nice moment. I'm really chuffed with. And then that's it really. There's so much going on in this level. It's just it's a very Thomas Was Alone level, and I'm really chuffed with it. So this is something that a mechanic that I kind of really wanted to bring in, which is the idea of avoiding trigger zones. The trigger zones become dangerous, just in and of themselves. So here you have, like, right at the top there at the end, you have those blank trigger zones, which are intersecting with the water as you swim across. You have to avoid those in order to not turn away from being buoyant and sink. You have to kind of avoid those. And it was really interesting to take something that the player has up to this point used, basically has empowered them, and then to make that a hazard that they have to avoid. And that's something that can only really be achieved once the players, getting the system, they've been through enough challenges with it, they understand how these trigger zones operate. You can start introducing these kind of abstract repurposing, I guess, of the existing mechanics. So it works really nicely, I think. Yeah, it's fun. And it becomes a little bit Frogger, which is quite charming. I should apologise. I've just been reminded that the things I've been referring to for the entirety of this commentary as trigger zones are in fact shifters. It's fine, I wrote the script but I forgot the words. So I've been reminded of that, so I will now endeavour to call them shifters. I apologise if I've been talking nonsense. I've probably been talking nonsense. Well done to you, by the way, for staying with me this long. A lot of people will have listened to the first few levels, had a good time, and then kind of moved on with their day. But you've really stuck it out, and that makes you special, and I appreciate that. Okay, so this environment. This environment is all about that shifting back and forth, but in a really kind of frequent way. It's kind of hopefully kind of a constant bounce back and forth. This was where I started to give in to my love of V. And wanted to the indie game where you switch gravity. This is the next few levels are kind of owed to that. Anti-gravity, having anti-gravity in the game as well as blanks makes for some really interesting puzzles because you actually have the alternation that is in the game V. It's not player controlled in that way, but it means you can do some really interesting kind of spatial puzzles. This is a very slow introduction. The biggest thing here was to introduce anti-gravity in a way that didn't confuse the player and that they didn't have to make decisions too quickly. So every choice you make here has a delay on it. There's no shifters that switch you from blank to anti-gravity immediately. You always have a chance to decide on your tactic and to adjust accordingly. I get to the fast stuff in a moment. And this is that moment. This is the bit where you kind of get stuck in an alternation loop. This was from the moment I knew I was going to have the shifters at the end of the game. This was kind of the first level that came to mind, mainly because it's ripped off from V. This idea of being forced to loop back and forth. Mine's a lot nicer. I don't kill you as much because I didn't want to. And yeah, you kind of progress these characters through. What's really interesting here is playing with the different distances these characters travel because of their differences in mass. They kind of each have a different way of interacting. So as you can see there, Joe and Sam move a lot more than Gray does, and that's cool because that means that you can have a lot of fun with the space. And as the blocks progress, you have different routes. It would surprise me massively if every player plays through this by taking the characters the same path. You've got a lot of options there, and I like the fact that you're going to find different ways through the space with each of the different characters, and probably different ways than everyone else who's played it. So yeah, it's one of those kind of freer puzzles that I quite like. So, I said before that the game is at its best when you have 2 or maybe 3 characters on screen at the same time. This level has, I believe, 9 characters, or is it 8? Might be 8. I think it's 8. I'll tell you why I think it's 9. It's because it was 9. Or 10, one of the two. But I actually removed one of the team jump. That was mainly because on a computer keyboard the numbers didn't go high enough that I could have a game which had that many characters in. I didn't really consider it, but I had to go without one of the team jump numbers, which would be fine if there wasn't a piece of dialogue in this level specifically referencing the fact that there are 5 members in team jump. Most people don't notice it unless I point it out. So yeah, hopefully I got away with it until you saw this. If you did get it, well done, you're very clever. Please don't tell anyone, it'll be our little secret. The environment is actually, this is probably the longest level in the game. This is one that most people take a good 5 to 10 minutes to work their way through. It's kind of frustrating as a result. I would, honestly, if I were to do it over, I would probably break this into several different levels and kind of allow you to go through each of these puzzles separately. But I didn't. So this is the level. It's quite long. Enjoy it. So this level's all about annoying the player. So that really here the shifters are placed in such a way that basically every shifter in this map is there to kill you. So you have to be very careful about where you tread, about getting characters past difficult shifters that would cause them problems, and that becomes the focus for the player, is kind of avoiding shifters, but more importantly just playing in a way that's intelligently avoiding them so that you can get through the level. I really like this level, and it was horrible before checkpoints. With checkpoints, it's actually, I think, one of the more interesting levels, because you progress through it, you get a few setbacks, but you carry on. And yeah, it's cool. I like it.
Trying to save his friends?
When I said there are a few levels that came to mind when I added the anti-gravity shifters to the game. The last one was the obvious kind of the V one, but this was the other one, was the idea of a falling room where we get bands of anti-gravity and blanks kind of passing through the environment, which means that you're constantly alternating. All of your characters just alternate every few seconds between the two states, and I liked that. I liked the idea of playing around with the players' kind of environment and their expectations, and making it so that what is quite a straightforward map, if you were just in one of these states, becomes an interesting challenge because you have to kind of factor in the different options. This is also, just being a bit arrogant for a little while, this is a motif that I use in quite a few games. So a lot of games I've worked on have included a bit where a small box falls through a tunnel. I don't know why, I just like the shape of that. So for example, the last boss fight of Invincible Tiger, which was an XBLA game I worked on, that takes place in a very, very similar environment. It's a thing I try and get into as many games as I can because I just think it's aesthetically interesting and feels dramatic. This is the penultimate level of the game, and yeah, the real thing here, I had to have the last kind of puzzle of the game. I didn't want to do that in the very last level of the game because I wanted the last level of the game to really just kind of tie up the story and be an experience kind of focus level rather than a puzzle. So this was the environment where I really wanted to play with the puzzle and play with those interactions. And the idea of I called them during development, I think I called these the brush elevators or something, where basically you have a different shifter of each type that's been introduced, minus the anti-gravity for obvious reasons, there's no proof. And you can basically choose which character you want to go into which of those shifters to progress through. And while there's a bit of wiggle room, there is really only kind of one solution. There's a few different kind of tweaks. You can use character A or character B to do the same job. But I liked that. I liked the idea of one last puzzle which the player hopefully kind of would have to fiddle with and have to work out with just before I get to that kind of final story moment. So this is the penultimate level of the game. And yeah, the real thing here, I had to have the last kind of puzzle of the game. I didn't want to do that in the very last level of the game because I wanted the last level of the game to really just kind of tie up the story and be an experience kind of focus level rather than a puzzle. So this was the environment where I really wanted to play with the puzzle and play with those interactions. And the idea of the kind of, I called them during development, I think I called these the brush elevators or something, where basically you have a different shifter of each type that's been introduced, minus the anti-gravity for obvious reasons, there's no roof. And you can basically choose which character you want to go into which of those shifters to progress through. And while there's a bit of wiggle room, there is really only kind of one solution. There's a few different kind of tweaks. You can use character A or character B to do the same job. But I liked that. I liked the idea of one last puzzle which the player hopefully kind of would have to fiddle with and have to work out with just before I get to that kind of final story moment. And this is it. This is the last level of the game. This is the moment that the whole story's been leading up to. You've got two characters with the separate shifter abilities. I don't play with them too much within the bulk of the level. I wanted you to use these two characters in an interesting way together to progress through, because obviously that's what the whole game has been about. And this to me really is the moment where everything hopefully comes together. We've got a nice minimalist environment which has some cool effects work, which I'm chuffed with and I think works. We've got that incredible last piece of music that David did, which I genuinely think is just one of the most moving pieces of video game music I've ever heard. With this one, actually, all that clever procedural stuff that I mentioned earlier, we didn't do it on this one. This one needed to be controlled by David. This had to have exactly the progression that he had in mind, and that leads to a precision to the way that it's been put together and arranged, and it feels epic. And then Danny comes in, and Danny's performance brings it up as well. This is the kind of the crescendo of the game, and it's a perfect illustration of why the collaboration was so important. The number of different people who put work into this game. And I think it works. I think it works as a result of that. It's something I'm a little mindful in our little chats that we've been having as you play this game, that I maybe haven't mentioned those guys enough. This is a game that could not possibly exist without the collaboration of specifically David and Danny, and what they bring to the storytelling and the environment of this game. So yeah, they're pretty awesome. This level ends with obviously that final rise, and yeah, I've had a few comments. People feel the ending maybe isn't quite as clear as it could be. I will tell you now what I think the ending means. To my mind, these two characters find an escape. They exit the computer. They become fully aware. Well, they are fully aware, but they come out into the real world. What happens next? Well, that depends. I don't know yet. I've got some ideas. I've got some thoughts on what happens next, but essentially every sci-fi movie you ever watch with an AI in happens next. This is their emergence. These are the first precursor AIs to succeed, and that's my reading of the ending. But your reading might differ, and that's absolutely cool. And I like reading some of the theories online. Okay, this is me. I'm done. I've enjoyed our time together. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for buying the game. That was very nice of you. Thank you very much for finishing the game. That was also very nice of you, even with all those stare bits. And thank you very, very much for listening to this, listening to my voice, listening to me in this recording studio, trying to say stuff that's vaguely interesting about the game. I hope that succeeded. Thank you so much for your time. It's really cool of you to join me. If you'd like to hear more of my ramblings, please follow me on Twitter. It's @MikeBithell. And yeah, I look forward to saying hello to you. Thank you very much for your time. Cheers.
They leapt